what I'm going to talk about are specific teaching strategies that I've used, and there are a lot more out there, but I'll just share with you four that I've found to be pretty helpful with identifying whose perspective is missing. Teaching strategies to broaden perspectives and to build inclusive environments. So one of the questions I always ask when I'm thinking about the content I'm presenting is whose perspective is missing? And Kianya mentioned this. And one of the ways to bring in those perspectives outside of the readings, or some of the ways, are through some of these different methods. So interviews, culture circles with literature, or through current events, and you just mentioned the newspaper articles and looking at those comparisons. Community resources, so it might be looking outside of our immediate classrooms and what we have available to looking at what's out in the community that can certainly enrich our classrooms and make them more inclusive. But also looking at our students and what they already bring with them. We call those home literacies, or funds of knowledge is a big term that people are looking more and more at in our education world. And then lastly, storytelling. And we'll talk some about each of these. So with interviews, oftentimes we bring in guest speakers. Most of us do that in a lot of different ways in our classrooms. But I found it to be more intentional if we look at this process of guest speakers also as interviewing individuals that may be able to contribute or add additional perspectives to our classroom. And it also engages students more into your curriculum rather than just having the guest speaker to present, which is fine. I do that still too. But there's also a nice time to have them to be more engaged by actually conducting interviews. So for example, what I teach and what I focus on in my classroom is we talk about parent engagement and ways of involving parents and engaging parents in meaningful ways, particularly families that are often marginalized in our schools. And so I can talk all day long about the perspectives of marginalized students and marginalized families, but until my students really have an opportunity to sit down and talk with families and engage with families who often feel marginalized and who often are, it doesn't really become meaningful to them. And so one of the things that I've found valuable is partnering with a community organization that serves, it's called a Brazos program, and it's operated by Charleston County Schools. And so my students actually have an opportunity to go and visit the program. They're prepped. One of the things that I will say is very key to doing work with groups that are marginalized is really prepping students and addressing stereotypes ahead of time. And so Dr. Kozart comes and she does this great presentation on working with English language learners and adversities. But we also do a lot of readings, and so it's very tied and integrated to the curriculum. But students have an opportunity to ask mothers in this program who are immigrants, who are Hispanics, who are learning English about their perspectives of schooling. And so they develop questions. I also have questions that they ask the mothers, but they get a chance to really sit down and interview them. But also the mothers interview our students and have questions about the education system and being teachers. And so that's one way in which I'm able to bring in some diverse perspectives about schooling, and quickly the students pick up on that schooling and the values are a little different in some countries versus our country here in the United States, and that all of our mothers that we're working with are coming from very different countries. They're not all from Mexico, so we have a lot of our mothers who are from many different countries serving Latino populations. And so by having them interview, they become more, well-rounded in their thoughts and their perspectives, and it certainly contributes to the curriculum that I'm teaching. And so, like I said, we have a textbook like Dr. Booker says, but whose perspective is missing? And so I look at that and I say, well, I wonder what our immigrant families we're serving, what they think about their schooling experiences, and really bring that into the fold and giving students an opportunity to ask those questions. So I have certainly positioned myself as a learner with my students. I tell them I don't have all the answers, I don't know everything, and there's a lot I still want to learn, and so that's part of why we're doing that. And we compose questions together. What would be questions they're interested in knowing about? And often they're questions like, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? And they see not only differences, but I think also similarities between their perspectives and the mother's perspectives. Then we come back, and I think an important piece of that is to reflect on the learning that took place while we're there during these visits. And then we use that new information. Okay, how do we take that information we learned from the mothers, and then how might you apply this to your future classroom? Or to impact change. You talked about transformation, to impact the way in which we're currently engaging families. So that's one example from my classroom. And so depending on your discipline, you may have interviews or give your students an opportunity to do interviews with individuals who are more so related to your curriculum or your content area. And how does that enrich? So thinking again about whose perspective is missing from your content, and then who could you potentially bring in that students could interview to ask questions regarding your classroom curriculum and making those connections. The second strategy that I've used and found to be helpful are culture circles. And basically, it's an opportunity where students and you as the faculty member can sit down and talk about a piece of literature that's related to, in some way, the content that you are teaching. And this is one book. I put this example up here. Actually, we read this is young adult literature, and we read this in a graduate course that I was assigned in my PhD program. And it was talking about the Cultural Revolution, which you can make connections to a lot of what was talked about in this book, to a lot of different courses and a lot of different content areas. But the way in which we were talking about how our curriculum is impacted by our society, that's the connection that our professor was making, because it was a curriculum course. This could be a book. You can talk about histories, you can talk about how people are marginalized in general. I mean, there's a lot of different connections that can be made using different types of literature or current events as well. And so my students have an opportunity to also bring in current events, and they're assigned to those a week in which they have to choose a current event related to the topic. And that really engages them in leading the discussion. They have to develop their discussion questions that's related to the topic, and it becomes more relevant for the students, and they're more so interested in that transformation process that we were talking about. Okay, now what do we do about the problem that we've been talking about? So a part of these culture circles is that you generate themes from, whether it's the literature that you choose or you generate themes from the current events and identify common happenings. And then you have the students, which is really important, are leading this discussion, and so that they take ownership of it. Problem posing, so having them think through, why is this problem occurring? Why are we seeing it in these different contexts? How is it related to what's currently happening? I was reading recently a chemistry teacher. A lot of people are using the Flint water crisis as a way of talking about social change. And so what this high school chemistry teacher realized, of course, is that, gosh, I can teach. And the students here were talking about science being an area where they wish more professors would do some of these different diverse ways of approaching their content. But this chemistry, high school chemistry teacher was using the Flint water, Michigan issue to talk about the properties of lead. And so really then that was his gateway into talking about the periodic table. Because he said, all before I struggled to get students interested in this topic, but this current event certainly lended itself into this robust discussion and being able to use that to engage the students. And so what often happens, and is an important part of culture circles, is dialogue and really listening to one another's perspectives and those multiple perspectives, because we all have very different perspectives to contribute. One of the other strategies would be community resources and home literacy. So Some people say, well, my class is all the same students, they all look the same. And of course we know that's not true. As we've heard at the very beginning, we all have had very different experiences that we can contribute. But if there are also perspectives, additional perspectives that you would like to add to your classroom, really looking at what's offered in the community, some of those community resources that could be brought in, and that might be, or that you take students out. So community explorations, and looking at what's available in our immediate community, but also communities outside of the immediate area. I know some of us, I do some work in North Charleston community, and we have individuals who are cultural ambassadors. I'm not an expert on the North Charleston community, so I invite those individuals to talk about their experiences there growing up, and some of what they're doing there. Photographs, if you're not able to get out, because it takes time, it's time consuming. I hear professors say, I don't have time to plan all of that, and it's a lot of work. But we can give students, some of the things that some teachers have done is give the students cameras, and they take those cameras into their own communities and may take photographs related to the content that you might be teaching, and using those photographs to demonstrate or to include in different discussions related to your content, to show different communities and what's available in those communities. Okay, so it's really a merging of personal and your curricular spaces to bring in those resources. And then the last strategy I'll talk about that I found to be very powerful in my work is storytelling. And you all did some of that. You were telling stories about your upbringing in the very beginning. But one of the ways to create a safe space is starting with those personal stories, whether that's in autoethnography or whether that's in my book. I actually have them create a children's book that they would share with students as a teacher about themselves and about their lives. Because as you all found out, once we start sharing about ourselves, it certainly creates a safe space, and students feel more comfortable with us. And so those can be, again, relevant. You can design it to be relevant to your course. What were your experiences growing up with chemistry or with art, whatever that might be for your course. And so in my case, I have them share family stories about how are your families engaged at schools? What was their role at schools, or what wasn't their role and why? And so they share some of those stories, and they create books that they can share with students, and they share them with the parents that we work with as well. So I wanted to just share those 4 concrete strategies that I use. I've also started doing more art as a window or a teaching strategy too, that can certainly cross and bring together more of our students in an inclusive environment. Technology, I've seen professors encouraging students to create things like podcasts that might be about a specific topic. So there are other strategies out there. So what I'd like you to do is think about one of these strategies, and I can go back to that slide, that you can include in one course, and how you might use that strategy to broaden perspectives or integrate missing perspectives into your curriculum, and then describe at your table how you might use one. So I'll back up, and then you can take a couple minutes to talk.
What is the break down the sexes into
And my strongest
Alright, so in the interest of time, we only have 1 minute left. So if one group would volunteer to share their course and how they integrate one of these strategies. Looks like someone's volunteering.
I got this idea from our literacy folks here. I teach a literacy course, and what I have them do is do a literacy biography, where they start from, for some of them it's before they were born because their mamas were reading to them, and they show their whole lives. Who was reading to them, why they were reading to them, what they were reading. Sometimes they do PowerPoint presentations, sometimes they do scrapbooks, sometimes they do games. It's up to them as to what it is that they want to do, but they have to show me what kind of readers they are and why. And it really gets them to start talking. They usually hate the idea, but they usually end up loving it. And my whole purpose is to get them to understand how they are where they are because they had those privileges along the way, and that they're going to have children in their classes who may not even have a book in their homes. So they have to understand what it is that they need to do for those kids.
Great. So storytelling can be very powerful with building that inclusiveness in your classroom, because that power of story defines similarities and then brings people together with asking questions. So I'll leave with a couple of resources for you all that I've found to be helpful that you may already be aware of or may not. But Teaching for Change, Teaching Tolerance, and Rethinking Schools has wonderful resources that, yes, it's geared toward K through 12, but I adapt a lot of things to work in my college classrooms as well. Start where you are, but don't stay there. Stay There is a wonderful book that kind of hits home the message we've been driving, that, pick 2 strategies to start with and work on that. It's a developmental journey and it's an ongoing journey with building inclusive environments, so it doesn't stop. And then the last one is just a tool to support teachers embarking on this journey and these reflective questions you can ask to students. So I think we thank you all for coming and
Thank you. I don't know if you 3 have worked together before, but that was fantastic, the way you unfolded that. I thought that was fantastic. So thank you again. Thank you so much. So, and also I just want to share, since I have the mic now, the idea of going from diversity to what I think has become, you spoke to this idea of seeing it as working with groups that are more oppressed, and this paradigm shift to seeing groups that cooperation and perspectives are asset building. I think that's where I saw you guys going, which I think is incredibly powerful. So this concludes our peer-to-peer, our first peer-to-peer. If you have time, please fill out the feedback forms on the blue sheet, and please take that red sheet with you. That's our open house, December 2nd. And please, write anything you want in terms of, should we do this again, a different title for peer-to-peer, what you're looking for. Mr. Snipes has been so kind to record this for us, so we're going to share it on Yammer. We can send the video out to others as well, because I thought it was absolutely fantastic the way you guys. Did you guys know you'd be on video? Did you know you? I don't know if you knew. If that's so, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, any comments in closing? Anyone want to share anything in closing as we? Yes, sir.
Is this going to be available? Your presentation is going to be available to us?
What they just?
The 3 presenters?
Oh, the PowerPoint.
Oh, the PowerPoint. Yes.
Sure. We can do that.
Great question. So the PowerPoint, yeah, that's a great idea if you guys don't mind. We can make
Is there a video of it too? Or is that what's happening with that?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Snipes. Yes, Mr. Snipes is videoing and we'll make that available as well to all who want that. All good questions. Anything else? Anything else? Well, please, there's still a little food left or more food. Please take that, and thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.